Good evening. I'm Maurice Dubois. John Dickerson is off tonight, and we begin with late breaking news. A federal grand jury returned a criminal indictment today against James Comey, the former director of the FBI and longtime nemesis of President Trump. The charges: making false statements and obstruction of justice. The indictment comes as the statute of limitations was about to run out. Ed O'Keefe at the White House has details.
He was a terrible person, did terrible things.
President Trump has railed about James Comey for nearly a decade. Now, the former FBI director has been charged with one count of making false statements and one count of obstruction of justice.
I just want people to act. They have to act, and we want to act fast.
And tonight, it appears they did. Attorney General Pam Bondi said the indictment reflects her department's commitment to holding those who abuse positions of power accountable for misleading the American people. FBI Director Kash Patel said previous corrupt leadership of his agency weaponized law enforcement. Nowhere was that more blatant, he said, than during the Russiagate hoax, a disgraceful chapter in history we continue to investigate and expose. As director of the FBI in the mid-2010s, Comey oversaw investigations into Hillary Clinton's email server and Trump's ties to Russia.
The Constitution of the United States.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Trump fired Comey just 4 months into his first term. The two have slammed each other periodically ever since.
Clapper and Comey and that whole group of criminals, they're criminals, and they made it very tough. You know, they did the fake Russia witch hunt that lasted for 2 years.
Just 5 days ago, the president posted this message publicly urging Bondi to file unspecified charges against Comey and two other political enemies. He also posted that he'd fired the U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia. Trump's former personal lawyer, Lindsay Halligan, who has no prosecutorial experience, was sworn in on Monday, and the case against Comey was revived. The charges focus on this testimony Comey made to Congress in 2020.
I can only speak to my testimony. I stand by what the testimony you summarized that I gave in May of 2017.
Responding to the indictment tonight, President Trump said Comey, quote, has been so bad for this country for so long and is now at the beginning of being held responsible for his crimes against our nation. Maurice?
Ed O'Keefe at the White House, thank you.
Breaking news, former FBI Director James Comey has been indicted. He is charged with one count of making false statements and another of obstruction of justice. Now, this is all related to a 2020 appearance that Comey made in front of the Senate Judiciary to answer questions related to Russian meddling in the 2016 election. Now, Attorney General Pam Bondi posted to social media writing, quote, no one is above the law. Today's indictment reflects this Department of Justice's commitment to holding those who abuse positions of power accountable for misleading the American people. We will follow the facts in this case. And just moments ago, former FBI Director James Comey himself posted a video to Instagram sharing his response to the news that he's been indicted. Take a look.
My family and I have known for years that there are costs to standing up to Donald Trump, but we couldn't imagine ourselves living any other way. We will not live on our knees, and you shouldn't either. Somebody that I love dearly recently said that fear is the tool of a tyrant, and she's right. But I'm not afraid, and I hope you're not either. I hope instead you are engaged. You are paying attention, and you will vote like your beloved country depends upon it, which it does. My heart is broken for the Department of Justice, but I have great confidence in the federal judicial system, and I'm innocent. So let's have a trial and keep the faith.
Now, earlier, President Donald Trump indicated on social media to Attorney General Pam Bondi that he wanted her to go after people he deemed as his enemies, including James Comey and Senator Adam Schiff, among others. Now, this type of case where a president puts pressure on Attorney General to go after people he sees as his enemies is truly unprecedented.
We begin here tonight with breaking news. Former FBI Director James Comey has just been indicted by the Department of Justice. CBS News has confirmed he's been indicted by a grand jury in Virginia on 2 counts of making false statements and another on obstruction of justice. All of this per a U.S. official. The charges stem from Comey's investigation of Trump and his alleged ties to Russia. To help us break this down, we're joined now by CBS legal analyst Jessica Levinson. So, Jessica, the president's been telegraphing this for days now. What's your reaction? He said he was going to do it.
My reaction is that this is an extraordinary escalation of what the president said publicly that he was going to do. Frankly, we haven't seen something like this recently, where we have seen that the president says he wants the Department of Justice to go after somebody perceived as a political enemy, and then those charges are in fact do come. So this is an escalation of what we've heard, frankly, from the beginning, where President Trump said lock her up with respect to Hillary Clinton. Now we have official charges that are being brought against James Comey.
A question we've been asking throughout these months, this early months of the administration, is can he just do this? I mean, is there a legal basis for these charges?
It's a really important question. What we know from the reporting is that career prosecutors looked at this case and found that there was not enough to bring charges. We know that some prosecutors were in fact fired, that a new prosecutor was replaced, and that President Trump picked another prosecutor. And in terms of the legal basis here, obviously what you need to do as an attorney is you have an ethical duty that you can only move forward if you have a good faith belief that you can prove these two charges that we just heard about beyond a reasonable doubt. Then what happens? What happens is that you bring this case to a grand jury. The grand jury has a much lower burden of proof than proof beyond a reasonable doubt. The grand jury will decide whether or not there's enough to move forward with an indictment. And at that point, we have what we have today, which is just moving forward with the indictment.
Okay, Jessica Levinson, thank you so much with the bombshell news there. James Comey indicted tonight.
Breaking news, former FBI Director James Comey has been indicted. A U.S. official tells CBS News he's been charged with one count of making false statements and another count of obstruction of justice. We want to get right to Scott Frederickson, defense attorney and former federal prosecutor. So, Scott, what do these charges mean, and what specifically are they referring to?
Well, reports are that Mr. Comey has been charged by a grand jury sitting in Alexandria, Virginia, in the Eastern District of Virginia, with counts of making a false statement to the Senate investigating the Russiagate matter, and also one count of obstruction of justice.
So charges are one thing. How likely do you think this will end up in the hands of a jury?
Well, I think there's a legitimate, serious question whether this ever gets to a jury, given, the recent circumstances, which are just unavoidable. We had a very experienced veteran U.S. attorney appointed by President Trump who determined there was insufficient evidence to indict Mr. Comey, and he was forced out. In his place is a new acting U.S. Attorney, Lindsay Halligan, who has a grand total of zero prosecutorial experience, zero experience in the criminal law. She comes to this job from her position as an aide to Mr. Trump. President Trump, as we know, demanded that Comey be indicted. So, yes, this is going to get to a judge, and whether it gets to a jury is a legitimate question.
Now, Trump has been putting pressure on Attorney General Pam Bondi to go after his enemies when it comes to these different types of charges. He also mentioned Senator Adam Schiff from California. I'm curious if you think that this is just the beginning.
It does appear that this is just the beginning, and that's a good observation on your part. Historically, this has never been done before. The White House has been walled off from the Department of Justice. We don't historically prosecute people based on political, retribution, revenge, or otherwise. So we may expect further indictments. The president wants Senator Schiff from California indicted, and wants Letitia James, the Attorney General of New York, indicted, and it goes on, people who he perceives as his enemy. So this may be the first of more to come from this district.
I want to put up Pam Bondi's statement here. She released just moments ago. She said, "No one is above the law. Today's indictment reflects this Department of Justice's commitment to holding those who abuse positions of power accountable for misleading the American people. We will follow the facts in this case." So, sir, do you believe the law is on her side?
Well, that's to be determined. I mean, that's a very general statement she makes. It's applicable to any case that gets indicted. No one is above the law. And, I think the concern, if I were in her shoes, is that if a judge on the motions in this case determines that this case was brought for political reasons without sufficient evidence, then there's potentially a very high price to be paid. And that will go all the way up to the Attorney General, as well as the Deputy Attorney General, as well as his acting U.S. Attorney. One thing we can look for initially in the presentation and the arraignment of Mr. Comey is who on behalf of the government steps up and is representing the government here, because apparently the experienced prosecutor in the office said there wasn't enough evidence. So, I understand what the Attorney General has said there. She's right. No one's above the law. But that also means if the prosecutors violate the law and bringing a case that had no business being brought, then they're the ones that are going to be behind the 8 ball.
I just want to echo something that you brought up earlier in this interview, is that something like this is unprecedented, this type of case, a president putting pressure on an attorney general to go after people that he deems as his enemies. Can you go into that one more time, sir, and just how unusual this type of case is?
This goes to a fundamental building block of democracy, where the power to charge someone criminally in the United States is always exercised by professional prosecutors. The Department of Justice historically has taken pains to isolate itself, to wall off the President of the United States. So there's no political pressure ever exerted on the Department of Justice, the Attorney General, the line assistant U.S. attorneys to bring this case or not to bring a certain case. And it appears that wall has been fully breached. And based on reports, it appears that this new acting U.S. attorney, no experience as a prosecutor, is taking direction from the President of the United States. Never happened before.
What are you going to be looking for in the next couple of days with this?
Well, I think we're going to see some explosive, arguments right out of the box. And I think what I'm going to be looking for is when this gets to the judge who's appointed to handle this case in the Alexandria Division, I suspect we're going to see that judge exercise some very strong supervision, given the fact that the U.S. attorney in his district, who was an experienced prosecutor, respected prosecutor by the judges in that district, was forced out when apparently he concluded there wasn't enough evidence in this case. So the judges, this district is one of the premier districts in our country. They handle most of our national security criminal cases. They take great pride in their professionalism. So I'm looking to see what the judges here do. I suspect, my prediction is we're going to see the government on defense, on its heels very quickly in this case.
Scott Frederickson, thank you so much for taking the time.
Of course.
All right, we are following breaking news. CBS has learned the Department of Justice has indicted former FBI Director James Comey. Prosecutors have indicted Comey on 2 counts. Details about those charges are forthcoming. For now, though, let's bring in CBS News Justice reporter Jake Rosen. He joins us on the phone here. And we're also looking at, Jake, a post here from Attorney General Pam Bondi that just came across saying, let me read this out loud to you. No one is above the law. Today's indictment reflects this Department of Justice's commitment to holding those who abuse positions of power accountable for misleading the American people. We will follow the facts in this case. Jake, thank you again for joining us here on the phone. Can you talk to us more about what you're learning at this hour?
Sure. So CBS News can report that Comey was charged with 1 count of making false statements and 1 count of obstruction of justice, according to U.S. officials who are familiar with the indictment, which was just officially approved by a grand jury today. Obviously, this is a major escalation in President Trump's efforts to target political opponents. And President Trump made no secret of his willingness to remove a prosecutor in Virginia and appoint a former personal defense attorney of his to take over that job to bring these charges kind of across the finish line. If the charges had not been brought before next Tuesday, the statute of limitations, 5 years plus, would have elapsed, meaning that the Department of Justice couldn't have brought these charges. Obviously, you saw Attorney General Pam Bondi confirming these and mentioning misleading the American people. We don't necessarily know, obviously, what those charges of obstruction are related to, but presumably these false statements are around Comey's congressional testimony from 2020, in which he made false statements, at least the Trump Department of Justice is alleging, knowingly to senators who were questioning him about the FBI's handling of the investigation into the Trump campaign and also the Russian interference in the 2016 election.
So I know that, Jake, this is something that we had potentially been looking out for, especially the past few days. Is there a sense of what happens from here?
Yeah, so what we'll see is, and if the indictment is not yet unsealed, so we'll obviously learn a lot more when that does happen. From there, it's obviously Comey would have to likely appear before a judge in the next coming days, either tomorrow or potentially Monday. Obviously, the Trump administration, again, has really made no secret of their willingness to do this. It was just finding a way to make this work. Obviously, Comey can now go into full defense mode. We have not heard him or his attorneys comment on any of this. And it comes at a crucial time where Attorney General Pam Bondi has obviously been pressured from the right of the party to deliver more of President Trump's agenda, deliver more of the prosecutions that President Trump has said are coming. Well, we knew that he was under investigation, but now we know they're officially pursuing charges against the former FBI director.
And Jake, for people who are not as familiar, can you give us just a kind of idea of the relationship between Comey and Trump and how that kind of evolved?
Yeah, and former FBI Director James Comey served as the FBI director from 2013 until he was fired by President Trump in 2017, towards the beginning of President Trump's first White House term. That set into motion Robert Mueller's special counsel investigation into the allegations that Russia interfered in the election, and the Trump campaign coordinated with the Kremlin about the election. Mr. Trump obviously has said that that's a hoax. And we know that Comey, since leaving that post, has been a very vocal critic of Mr. Trump, calling him unfit in many interviews. And we saw earlier this year, he put himself kind of back in the spotlight when he posted on Instagram that 8647 quote, which the Trump administration saw as a threat to obviously hurt President Trump or cause violence against him. And given the last couple of months, that of political violence we see in the country, that's obviously kind of been exacerbated, right?
All right, Jake Rosen, thank you very much. We appreciate your insight on this breaking news. Again, that breaking news that former FBI Director James Comey has been indicted on 2 counts, one of making false statements, another of obstruction of justice. Thank you for watching us tonight. CBS Evening News Plus begins after the break. I'm Nancy Chen. You're watching CBS News 24/7.